Hey everyone, it's Sevi, and welcome to my Kachina guide where we'll be covering her kit and talents, constellations, best artifact and weapon builds, team synergies, gameplay tips, and more to better understand this cute and tiny dancer. But before we stumble into the guide, let me tell you about today's sponsor. If you're looking for some chaotic fun, I've got a game for you. Introducing Stumble Guys, a massive free-to-play online multiplayer knockout game where you can play tons of different arenas and game modes, including the new ranked mode, to find out exactly how good you are at stumbling and sliding around. No! Hey! Oh, you thought you could get rid of me! I won! The later you're eliminated, the more points you get. But if you get eliminated first, no points for you. Makes sense. Anyway, there's lots more to do like hide and seek, tournaments, and even community-made arenas. Create a party room for you and your friends to make game night even more chaotic. Customize your character to increase your risk by 100% as you stumble, and there are lots of skins to win from games and randomly pull from the selector. So download Stumble Guys for free using the link in the description and stumble your way to victory. Thanks Stumble Guys for sponsoring. Now back to the video. Kachina is a 4-star Geo polearm character that scales mainly on defense. She offers exploration benefits and combat mechanics thanks to her Turbo Twirly ride. Her normal attacks look like cool dance moves. However, they scale on attack, while Kachina's other more relevant talents scale on defense. We won't be relying on them as much for her main damage source. Rather, it's her skill's Night Soul Blessing where she's most feature-packed. Casting it brings out her Turbo Twirly ride, which uses Night Soul as its fuel and is considered a Geo construct. You can either leave it independently or mount it. By itself, it does Geo AoE damage at 2-second intervals until it depletes its Night Soul. From a full Night Soul gauge, it can slam for 6 times by itself. So the attack AoE isn't that wide, so enemies can rather easily get out of range, especially if you leave it stationary. It can also get pushed around by you or enemies. On the other hand, mounting it allows you to ride around your very own mini drill taxi. You can manually pound and slam the ground, dealing AoE Geo damage, breaking Geo shields and structures more quickly, and mining ores effectively. Climbing with Turbo Twirly is probably my favorite feature. It's a quick way to scale heights, and vertical traversal in Natlan is a much easier experience, especially with all those rock formations. You can only extend Turbo Twirly's duration if you're riding it and have Phlogiston reserve, and you can also consume Phlogiston to keep slamming the ground. That's how you can extend Kachina's traversal or on-field combat time. In other places, it will simply disappear when the Night Soul gauge runs out, and you'll have to redeploy it on cooldown. Also, even if the manual ground slamming is considered a skill damage, it actually triggers effects that are dependent on doing normal attacks. For instance, she can trigger Xingqiu's burst attacks while slamming. It's not really a general use case, and I don't know if this is a bug or not, but it is there if you have a use in mind. Then Kachina's burst first deals 1 hit of defense scaling AoE Geo damage, and if Turbo Twirly is already active, it will get repositioned to her location. It then places a field for 12 seconds that gives Turbo Twirly an increased attack AoE and movement speed while you are riding it. It won't increase the base damage though. Really, its main benefits are a wider AoE, faster movement, and quick repositioning if needed. If you also want to trigger a crystallized reaction ASAP rather than wait for Turbo Twirly to hit the enemy first, using her burst can help ensure that. As for her Ascension passives, they're very simple and damage focused. The Ascension 1 passive gives her a 20% Geo damage bonus for 12 seconds after triggering a Night Soul burst, and the Ascension 4 passive increases Turbo Twirly's damage based on 20% of her defense. And for her Exploration passive, you can regenerate 20 Phlogiston stamina by picking up harvestable items, and Kachina reveals Natlan unique materials on your minimap. Expectations-wise, when it comes to her personal damage, it's going to be relatively subpar compared to actual Geo DPSs. I have some more notes about her damage later on, but generally, we're going to use her primarily as a support. However, she also has no innate support functions, aside from possibly making crystallizes to help shield you. Instead, we'll have to rely more on her equipment and team synergies to give her more utility. For talent leveling priority, her skill is the most important, with the burst being low priority. Normal attacks don't need any leveling as they scale on attack, but these talent levels only increase the damage multiplier. If you just want to save resources and don't really care about her personal damage, you can just skip out leveling her talents. Her exploration mechanics will be completely unaffected. To ascend Kachina, you'll need Yum-Kasor Mountain King materials, Quinepa berries, and warrior whistles. For her talents, she wants the Conflict series, more warrior whistles, and the fading candle from the Arlecchino weekly boss. If you're pulling on the first phase's banners, then prepare to get some Kachina Constellations. However, they're not really big game changers or necessary for her main utilities, so no need to deliberately pull them. C1 gives Kachina the ability to absorb crystallized shards when mounting or unmounting Turbo Twirly, so that's an easy way to activate shielding. Picking up shards also restores 3 energy to Kachina every 5 seconds, lowering her energy needs. C2 makes her burst replenish 20 Night Soul points, and it now automatically summons Turbo Twirly if you don't have one yet. It basically extends Turbo Twirly's time, which can result in 2 extra hits. C3 increases her skill level by 3, then C4 now gives her an extra support feature since it gives the active character a defense bonus based on how many enemies are in the burst field, which defense scalers like Noelle and Ito will benefit from, or even herself when she's on field. As such, you'll also want to have enough energy generation to burst reliably. C5 increases her burst level, and lastly, C6 makes Kachina deal an additional AoE damage instance when the active character's shield is replaced or destroyed, which can trigger every 5 seconds. This is compatible even with crystallized shields, so that's even more use from the shards you collect. Now we can move on to her builds, starting with Kachina's stat goals. If you want to optimize damage, go for a Defense Sands, Geo Damage Goblet, and Crit Circlet. However, since it's not going to be that high even with such investment, you can just not be bothered by that and get by with whatever stats, especially when you're more concerned about her artifact set bonus effects. An exception would be giving her a Crit Rate Circlet on a Favonius Lance build, or an Energy Recharge Sands if you really need it for bursting every rotation. For substats, Defense, Energy Recharge, and Crit are ideal, but again, you can be very loose. Elemental Mastery main or substat pieces can also be fine if you don't care for her damage, as they will boost her Crystallizes shield health. However, this should only be incidental and not something you'll chase for when farming. Having another dedicated shield or healing source is also much more reliable than just depending on crystallized shields alone to sustain you long term. If you want her to burst every rotation, she can need a substantial amount of ER, but this can change with her C1 and team. If your team doesn't really need her burst up times though, it's perfectly fine to ignore her ER. As for her artifact sets, this is where Kachina gets even more support utility. The main recommendation is the new Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City. Only a Natlan user with Night Soul mechanics will fully unlock its effects, so Kachina is a prime candidate for that. The 2-piece effect gives her energy while triggering Crystallize with one of the crystallizable elements, Pyro, Hydro, Electro, and Cryo, gives a 40% damage bonus to Geo and the other elements involved. It's practically a better Archaic Petra alternative. Since the set bonus can trigger either on or off field, you can let Turbo Twirly independently trigger Crystallize, or manually do it while mounted or using her burst attack. From my experience, there might be some cases where very mobile enemies will move away from Turbo Twirly, and you can miss triggering the effect the first time. In such cases, I'd rather ensure a crystallized reaction by either manually slamming or using her burst. There are other situational support sets, but generally speaking, the scroll set is just going to be a good all-around choice, and since Kachina's stat goals are very loose, you can also settle for whatever pieces just to get the set bonus. With her weapons, it's also a straightforward selection. The free-to-play craftable Footprint of the Rainbow is the only defense substat-based polearm, and using the skill gives even more defense. This boosts her damage and tankiness, so it's practically made for her. This can be your default option, more so if you're aiming to boost her damage, but it offers no other support utility. Another great 4-star support alternative is the Favonius Lance. It generates particles to help battery teammates, so if your team needs its particles to smoothen out your rotations, this will help a lot with that. Just remember that it only triggers on field, so do so first before swapping her out. The ER stat and particles also help a lot with her energy needs if you want to burst every rotation. For other damage-oriented pole arms, just remember that attack stats and bonuses are irrelevant to her, and that her skill damage will be her main damage output. That heavily narrows down her options. The Battle Pass pole arm deathmatch is a notable choice, since its low base attack doesn't matter much with Kachina, and it gives a lot of crit rate. There is a defense bonus, but it only works versus 2 enemies. Other pole arms that have crit can also just serve as a crit stat stick. But again, the Footprint is there anyway for its big defense buff, so that can just be your default damage-oriented option too. And finally, let's talk about Kachina's team synergies. Again, there's nothing in her base kit that gives support utilities. The most notable innate aspects are probably that she can work with effects that need to trigger Crystallize, want to deal damage over time from Turbo Twirly's independent attacks, and want a Geo construct like Chiori's requirement for summoning a second Tamoto. And once you get her C4, that at least makes her able to provide an on-field defense buff for defense scaling teammates. Rather, it's with her artifact bonuses that she gets more support buffing functions. So you can just start start her out as a general support flex slot as a solo Geo unit, particularly for teams with the crystallizable elements. With the scroll set equipped, she can give a 40% elemental damage buff for them, which is a pretty good amount. And being able to buff multiple elements as long as you can individually crystallize them can let you get more value out of it as long as you set it up properly. You can think of her as an albedo substitute, but instead of doing as much damage, you're trading in buffing utilities with her artifact set. Now for added synergy, you can then put her in double or triple Geo teams, and at least one other teammate to trigger crystallize on. With a scroll set effect, Kachina buffs her Geo DPS teammates plus whatever the element of the other unit is. This also unlocks Geo resonance, and her crystallized shards can help maintain the resonance bonus if you don't have a dedicated shielder. Just don't use a pure Geo team on her scroll set, as that means there is no way to trigger a reaction for the set bonus. For example, in a Navia Pyro team, Kachina can buff both Xiangling and Navia's damage while helping generate crystals for Navia's Gunbrella. The scroll set's damage percent bonus buff also helps balance the high attack buff of Bennett. In a Chiori Kachina team, that allows Chiori to summon 2 Tomotos due to Turbo Twirly being a Geo construct. With C4, she can further buff Ito or Noelle who scale on defense. That's something like Noelle with Farina on the team, so Kachina will also buff Farina's hydro damage, or Bennett on a Noelle or Ito team just to ensure there's something to trigger crystallize on. If you already have your own versions of these teams, you can more easily test how Kachina's support utility impacts it, since you don't need to level up herself or her talents to unlock her main support functions. So regarding her damage output, it's in Natlan where you have Phlogiston to extend her mount duration. That way you can spam the ground slams to get more damage out of her. Outside of Natlan, Turbo Twirly can only slam the ground 6 times or 8 times with her C2. In some teams where the rotation and buff times aren't very strict, you can just front load her damage with Turbo Twirly by spamming it while mounted before or after you switch to the actual DPS unit. The pro of manually controlling is that you can better ensure that she will hit the enemy while leaving the Turbo Twirly stationary makes missing hits more likely. So technically, you can still squeeze out her damage even as a support, but that means investing in farming and leveling artifacts that have really good stats for her. And expected damage returns even with high investment to be subpar compared to actual DPSs, but if that's okay with you, or if you just want to enjoy her that way, then go ahead. If that's the case, you could still stick to the scroll set build. She still benefits from its 40% damage bonus anyway while supporting other characters. Other 4-piece set alternatives are mainly focused on personal damage, like the Obsidian Codex, Husk of Opulent Dreams, and Golden Troop, but whatever good pieces you have of those are obviously better on actual DPSs. And for weapons, the same points discussed earlier will apply. And that's it for this guide on our adorable little Beyblade girl. Let me know in the comments if you'll be building her and what you think about her so far. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!